Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Terry Sullivan. This is Dave Drayson, and we are back with another exciting, hopefully, show today, Big Time Memories.
Oh, we've got a show today. Unlike other ones that we've done, we usually focus on, one of the big time wrestling stars. But over our careers, with these stars, we've got some memories away, from them. And they're just precious, memories and, theories and myths and everything else in between.
Stories that don't fit anywhere else fit on this show.
Fit on this show today.
That's right. And we're still going to deal with a lot of big names.
Oh, yeah. Don't doubt about that. But let's start with one that's been a mystery, a myth, has been challenged, has been said it didn't happen. Guys reputable, no, it did happen. And it's the big Cobo Arena box office robbery.
Now, this story has never been told publicly. It's infamous in the business, in the wrestling business. Back in the later 70s, this was in 1978, right? October 8th, 1978, there was a Cobo show. At this point in time, big time wrestling crowds had dropped from 12,000, 10,000 to 3,000, 2,000, and eventually would drop off even further to the point where big time wrestling was no longer presenting at Cobo Arena. But money was tight.
Yep, very tight at the time.
The Sheik and his wife Joyce were running the promotion, and things were not good.
It was starting to be a little sinking ship. There was a hole in the hull, and things were going downhill. And like you said, money was tight.
They were spending a lot of money on a lot of different things, a lot of different cities. We talked about having TV in 30 cities around the country. Not all, but some of those TVs at times did cost a pretty good amount of money.
Yeah.
Not all was made up by sponsorships.
And the TV truck at that time was repossessed, so we didn't have that, to deal with. But on this one date, October 8th, Sheik was not on the card in Detroit that day.
No, he had been talked into pulling himself out of Cobo. Gary Hart, Mark Lewin, a few others decided that, problem with the territory is the Sheik hasn't burned out. Mm-hmm. Too many Sheik main events, too many quick matches, too many fire or screw job endings, and with probably a lot of validity to that. But so the Sheik would take himself off the show every now and then. The problem with that was whenever the Sheik took himself off the show, you'd lose a couple of thousand paid seats, paid tickets. So
he was the main draw for big time wrestling, no doubt about it.
So this night he was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Sheik against Andre the Giant. Mm-hmm. Terry and Dory Funk were the big draws. Mark Lewin was also there. But the Funks were supposed to be the draws, and they came into Detroit expecting a certain payoff. Now, after the show is over, I'm out in the hallway outside of the dressing rooms back in the bowels of the Cobo Arena talking to Terry and Dory Funk. You told me that Brian
Bucantis was there, Gary Kamensak, Gary Mancuso, I think, was there, and Brad McFarlane. They witnessed this also.
Some of the photographers were there. And Funks were waiting to get paid. I was just waiting, who knows what, because I never got paid that night. In fact, nobody got paid at Cobo. Everybody got paid once a week. Checks went out on Mondays, either given to you in the towns or they would mail them to you. But occasionally wrestlers would get advances, and I don't know whether the Funks were waiting for an advance on their check or were waiting for their entire money. All of a sudden, the door bursts open. Here comes Eddie Jr., Captain Ed George, Eddie Farhat Jr., the Sheik's son. Oh my God, you're not going to believe it. The box office has been robbed. There is no money. And my thought in my mind was, you're kidding me. This is not true. Eddie, I know you well enough to know that you're BSing here. The Funks knew the same thing. Nobody really acknowledged, I don't know what he expected us to do, start jumping and tearing our hair out and whatever might have happened here, somebody really robbed the box office. Nobody believed him.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like the Funks, they would have been the first ones to go chase the thief.
Probably so.
You know?
Yeah.
But of all things, Joyce Farhat, who usually handles some of the money and, the other, particulars of the Cobo, she had already left.
Yeah.
She wasn't there.
She got out of Dodge. Nobody really knew exactly where she was. What I think is that, as I said, times were tough. And I think there were some important bills due somewhere, either on a personal or business level, perhaps Cobo Arena itself to keep Cobo every 2 weeks. But whatever, somebody made the decision is that the Funks aren't going to get paid tonight.
Yeah. And, Terry Funk wrote about this incident in his
book.
book.
Yeah.
My friends, the Garys, Brian and Brad, they told me about it, But throughout the years, Eddie Farhat Jr. denied that ever happened.
Oh, yeah.
He never did that.
Yeah.
And the thing that, perplexes me about this whole situation is that if there was a box office robbery at Cobo Arena, first and foremost, that box office is like a fortress.
Yeah.
Nobody gets in there, and Frankie, the head guy there, Frankie, he would have chased away a robber and just by talking to him. But why wasn't there no police report
that we know of?
Yeah, police weren't called.
No.
You didn't see anything in the Detroit News of the Detroit Free Press the next day about a box office. That would have been big news.
Yeah, because I bought the Detroit paper for the next week.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. The only thing that was in the paper were the results.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, truth or myth?
Well, a little of both.
It actually happened, fans. No matter, you're not going to doubt Terry Funk, who wrote that in a worldwide book.
Of course, as he wrote in his book, it was after a match between he and Dory against the Sheik and the Butcher. But in fact, it was not. The Sheik was not there. Night. If the Sheik had been there, my opinion never would have happened.
No, he wouldn't have let that
Sheik would have sat down with Terry and Dory and said, "Look, man, can you float me for a couple of weeks?" And the Funks came back, so obviously at some point in time they got paid.
Yeah. So, and at that time, nobody trusted Eddie Farhat Jr. anyway. The captain. The captain went down with the ship that night.
He was looking out for the family.
Yep. And we know what happened to that. It didn't go well.
No.
Now let me ask you this, Terry. Throughout our great run, yours and mine, throughout the time with Big Time Wrestling, we've met so many great stars. But there's also an integral part of professional wrestling, not only the wrestlers themselves, but you got to count the third man in the ring.
Oh, yeah.
The referees, who don't really get, the credit that they deserve.
Right.
Can you name some of the referees that we used to have in our territory?
Oh, yeah. There were some great ones. The referees in the state of Michigan were all appointed by the State Athletic Commission.
Chuck Davey, chairman.
That's right. Charles Davey, please. Michigan State Athletic Board of Control. Yes, sir. But they were all... Pete Post was just a wonderful guy. Worked a lot of the towns. Al Warshawski.
Old-time professional wrestler.
Built like a spark plug, or a fire hydrant, something like that. John Rapez. Big guy, Big John. Of course, the most famous, I think, referee for the general public, Al Bulldog Thomas.
Oh, he was my favorite.
Would say, popular Pontiac, Michigan school teacher.
Yes, he was.
He was infamous in my mind and that of many others for having the slowest 3 count in history. The guy would start to count 3. You could go grab a beer and come back, and he hadn't gotten to 3 yet. 1, 2.
Well, as a school teacher, counting like that is easy as 1, 3, 2.
There you go. But at least he was consistent. It was a consistent count. Lou Duva was another one. Ray Taylor from Toledo, great wrestler. Pat Sita from Dayton and Cincinnati. Terry DeMore from Toledo. George Pozniak began as a referee.
Yeah.
Later went on to run the TV crew, the WWS TV. And there was another referee. And for the very first time, we can tell publicly who this particular referee was. I'm going to show you a picture. This is a match between Global Brazil and Johnny Valentine. And there's a referee right in the middle. The referee's name, the name that he used in Detroit, was James Frazier.
Yep.
But in reality,
Who was he?
he was James Francis Fleeser. That's right. Joyce Fleeser's brother. Francis Fleeser, the promoter's son, his eldest son, Jimmy.
And Joyce's brother.
Right. Great guy, worked for Detroit Edison, and he, as a matter of fact, his wife worked for the promotion as well.
She worked in the office, isn't that right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. She was one of 3 signatories on the checks. So when the checks came out, it would either be Edward Farhat, Joyce Farhat, or Diane Fleeser.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't the only relative of the Sheik to work for Big Time Wrestling, which many people don't know.
Who else?
Well, one of the more famous ones, there used to be a ring announcer who became a wrestler by the name of Mike Thomas.
Right.
Mike Thomas was in reality Mike Farhat, one of the Sheik's nephews.
Mm-hmm.
There was another referee by the name of Butch Cassidy.
Right.
Another Sheik nephew, Butch Ritchie. And Butch's brother Paul Ritchie was on the TV crew and lived for years and years and years with the Sheik's sister's son, Paul and Butch.
So yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, it was the family tree, reaped the fruit.
Right.
That
The Sheik was always willing to reach out and help his family in any way, and did so many, many times over the years, not the least of which was hiring them to work in his business.
Now, wrestling fans, you're hearing stories that have never been told before, facts that never should have came out, and we're telling them here for the very first time. And I'm going to bring up another one. Remember back in the day, we would be doing promos up in Williamston, Michigan, at the garage facility across the street from the office with the mobile truck. Mm-hmm. Well, we would do these promos during the week. So usually during the week, a lot of the guys weren't there to do their promos, to promote their matches. So what we would do is that, Terry and or Bob Finnegan would be running down the card for a particular town. Just say either Cincinnati, Dayton, Toledo, Detroit. And then what they do when they come to a match, they would put up one of my photographs of that particular wrestler. Mm-hmm. And they would show the wrestler who they were going against and stuff. But there was one incident that I remember that Eddie Creechman, who always did the talking for the Sheik, well, he wasn't there to do the promos to promote the Sheik's match. So there was somebody there in the studio who imitated Eddie Creechman and did the promos.
I don't know who it could be. The mighty Sheik will throw the fire in your face.
It was Terry Sullivan.
It was many more than one time, believe me. Creechman would come in for Detroit. We'd do the Detroit promos after Cobo, but then a couple of days later, we'd do the promos for all the other towns.
Right.
The Sheik would be in those towns, but without Creechman. So, they wanted a little pizzazz, and so I would do the Creechman thing.
Yeah, and you did great. Fans believe it. Fans didn't know. This is the very first time this is being revealed.
Nobody ever picked it up. I remember walking in the hallways. I did it for Detroit one time, too, I can remember. And I'd walk in the hallways, and some fan was saying, "Oh, did you hear what Creechman said on TV today?" This cracked me up.
Yeah, and I don't know what triggered that memory for me, but I remember being in the studio and watching that, and it's like, we should reveal that to these people on our show today.
He was the only one I did, though. I didn't do anybody else.
I would have sworn you could have done a really good Pompero Firpo, too, but...
Oh, yeah, that would have been it.
Yeah, that would have been it. Now, all the years that we've gone to wrestling, not only in Detroit, but Cincinnati, and, my time in Big Time Wrestling and pre-Big Time Wrestling here in Detroit, let me ask you this. What would have been your one favorite match that you witnessed of all time?
That would be really, really, really hard to narrow down. First of all, I would say most any match with the Sheik in it would have been my favorite. As far as an all-round in-ring athletic endeavor, all things considered, it would have to be Bobo Brazil against Johnny Valentine. This was from Cobo Arena. It was one fall, 60-minute time limit. It went to a draw. It went to 60 minutes. The TV truck was there. We recorded it. It made up one entire big-time wrestling television show. One match, the only time that ever happened.
Wow.
One 60-minute match, and it was just an absolute classic. Watching two of the top of all time, two of the top wrestlers ever, and it became real clear, really evidently, real clearly why they were two of the top wrestlers ever. It was so obvious because of the way they had the crowd in their hand from the time they went in until the time it ended. You know, they had to pace themselves to go 60 minutes. Now, both of them were in good shape.
Yep.
And they did go 60 minutes, and I saw it a lot. I saw a lot of draws in my time. But Valentine, as we talked in his segment, was a kind of a guy who would grab an arm bar, for example, and hold it for 15 minutes and just crank in the pressure. And then you'd watch Bobo, showing the effects of that hold that it was having on it, showing his arm useless, limp, and then Valentine would start on another body part, and 15 minutes was gone.
Mm-hmm.
It was just an incredible display of athleticism and wrestling talent that I don't think you would see that much, if ever, anymore.
No,
how about you?
Fans would have been bored,
Yeah.
in that kind of match. But me,
Your favorite?
Being very fortunate to have been in many territories around the country, like when I worked for the office in LA, here in big time wrestling, I always, was very fortunate to be able to shoot ringside in St. Louis for Sam Muchnick. So I saw some classic, Dory Funk versus Jack Briscoe, Harley race matches, the Blackjacks, Baron von Raschke, just so many of the greats. I mean, even Lou Thez matches that I seen in particular places. And, it's debated all over the internet, the Randy Savage, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, greatest, wrestling match ever. I dispute that because I can put that one to shame with one that I saw. And people may not agree with me because they may not have been their favorites. But the most classic wrestling match I ever witnessed would have been Cowboy Frankie Lane against Chris Colt.
Really?
At Cobo Arena, they put on a masterpiece of holds, high flying. It was just unbelievable what I witnessed.
Well, there were a couple of guys who could really, really go.
Oh,
Christopher Colt, when he first came in, known as one of the Hell's Angels, boy, could they raise hell.
oh yeah. Well, he was Ronnie Dupree then, wasn't he?
Paul
Dupree,
Yeah.
with his
Ronnie
brother.
was his brother.
Right.
Yeah.
And, just what a masterpiece of a match that was. And to take pictures of it, I'm looking through my lens half the time, and then I'm, looking up over the lens. And it's like, my God, these guys are just giving it all. And to me, that's my favorite match of all time.
And I think one thing about Christopher Colt is that a lot of people say he was so underrated.
Oh, the most underrated wrestler performer in the history.
Yeah.
I'm saying the history of professional wrestling, in my opinion.
Well,
That guy
time.
could do everything.
Yeah, very much ahead of his time.
And yes, he was. I mean, he main evented, mainly mid-card guy, wherever he appeared. Unfortunately, he had his demons, as many wrestlers did. But, when it came to going out in that ring and performing, there's nobody that outshined him in that particular night when he was on the card.
You talk about Cowboy Frankie Lane.
Oh.
One of the infamous stories about Frankie Lane regards the Magnificent
Zulu.
First time I ever heard the phrase $1 million body and a 10-cent brain. was used in reference to the Magnificent Zulu. And that pretty much sums the guy up. He was, 6'5",
Yep.
280, built like you couldn't believe, couldn't wrestle a lick. And he was a little difficult to get along with sometimes, but I think you could probably say the same thing about Cowboy Frankie Lane.
Yep.
Not everybody liked Frankie Lane. He was a little bit controversial. He, didn't really care what people thought about him, and if he didn't like you, he didn't have time for you. And he didn't like a lot of people. Happened to like me for some reason, which was always cool. But one night, the Frankie Lane and Zulu traveled from Toledo, where both were staying at that point in time, to Canton, Ohio. They both had a match, not against each other, against another opponent. Later on in the evening, Cowboy Frankie Lane was standing outside of the dressing room in Canton watching a match go on in the ring. And apparently there had been a little friction between the two of them. And from what I hear, Frankie liked to get his digs in on Zulu endlessly, to the point where Zulu became enraged, didn't say anything, but came up behind Frankie Lane, literally with a lead pipe, and cracked his skull.
Yep.
Down he went. They called the ambulance. The ambulance took Frankie away, took him to the hospital. After the show was over, Jack Kane and I had come down from the office. Jack Kane was the booker, the man responsible for the talent for the Sheep at that point in time. And Jack says, we got to go to the hospital. We got to check on Frankie. We got to take in his belongings, his suitcase. Zulu, by that time, had left. Zulu had left the building and literally had left the territory. Nobody ever saw him here again. He was history, and probably still have a warrant out for him. But Jack and I went to the hospital. We were the only two who went to the hospital to see Frankie and check on him. When they finally let us in, Frankie was conscious. He was very calm. He said, who did it? And I said, well, it was Zulu. And he said, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. He said, he's a so-and-so, and went on a little bit. And Frankie said, I need you to call my girlfriend for me. Let her know what happened. So, geez. So I got that job, calling her. And she said, who did it? And I said, Zulu. And she says, I knew it. They just could not keep off of each other's backs. Frankie was out for months after that. Eventually came back. As I said, Zulu was never heard from in this area again. He turned up a few places, and the result was the same. He just could not wrestle.
Well, he had the body, for it. He big bodybuilder, great physique. But like you said, promoters would bring him into a territory. I know he went down to Georgia and worked for Ann Gunkel's group and with Thunderbolt Patterson, and just couldn't do a lick.
Yeah.
They couldn't do a thing with him.
And his attitude wasn't great either. He was pretty much a prima donna.
Yeah, and then he went out to California,
Right.
where he changed his name from the Magnificent Zulu to Ali Pasha.
Right. Yeah.
And lasted a little bit there. Big presence. Tried to make him a main eventer, but in the end, he couldn't wrestle a lick.
Yeah. He was the kind of guy you just had to cut your losses on at some point in time. He was, great to look at, but after people see him once, what are you going to follow up with?
Yeah, back in the early 2000s, I got word that, when I was out in LA, just on vacation, I heard that Zulu was, his name was really Ron Pope,
Right.
was working at security at a strip club by the LA airport, and also, somebody said that he was driving a taxi cab, so maybe he did better driving than he did wrestling. That's all I got to say.
And one other note here, which a lot of people out there probably don't know, is you are an author.
Yes.
And some of the photographs that the people are so thrilled with here on Bigtime Memories can be found in this book.
Yeah, it's called, Return to the Cobo, Volume 2. And It's all the photographs, some of the photographs that you fans have been, witnessing on our programs, and more. And the book is $29.95, and each photograph in the book is captioned personally by myself. The Whitsomes. I try to put a little humor in it to make people entertained in the book. Like I have one photograph of the Sheik hitting Ernie Ladd over the head with a 2x4, and I captioned it, "Banging the dumb slowly." So, besides all, a lot of the photographs, I've got clippings in there from, the newspapers. There's other memorabilia, like the Ballad of Bobo Brazil record, pennants, so many other things in the book. It's 244 pages. If you fans, would like to purchase it and get some of the photographs that you're witnessing here, and a lot more that you're not, that we may get to over time. Like I said, it's $29.95. You can go to WrestlePrints, WrestlePrints. It's on your screen there. You can order it, have fun, and enjoy it. And if I meet up with you one day, I'll be happy to autograph it for you.
Fair enough. I've got Polaroids of my dog for sale if anybody's interested.
Well,
that about wraps it up, right?
No, let's tell one more story that's never been told. Our good friend.
Oh no,
Killer Tim Brooks.
Okay,
he was a card. He was always a prankster. Always great to be around.
Yeah,
whenever you're around Killer Brooks, you've got a story to tell.
Oh yeah.
Just like I always say, Dr. Jerry Graham. When you're around him, if you don't have a Dr. Jerry Graham story, you weren't in the wrestling business. But this one time, Toledo, Ohio, and you'll remember this fan from Cincinnati. We called him Mikey Pooh. He was a little short kid,
Skinny.
5 foot, 5'1". He looked like a Keebler elf in a way. No knock on him, but he did. He looked like a Keebler elf.
Good description.
Yeah.
Mikey Pooh.
And he would always be looking for autographs and stuff like that, with the wrestlers, and especially the heels. He loved the heels, and he loved Killer Brooks. Well, this one time in Toledo, Killer Brooks, poked his head out the dressing room door. Myself and Kabuki and Sheik and so many other, because in Toledo, the heel dressing rooms are on one end of the arena, the baby faces, the good guys are on the other end. Never intermingled. So Killer Brooks pokes his head out the dressing room door, and there's Mikey Pooh, and ooh, can I get your autograph? And it's like, Killer Brooks had probably had enough at this time. I don't know what was up his keister this particular day, but what he did, he reached out the door, grabbed Mikey Pooh, pulled him into the dressing room. He ended up stripping him naked, took his clothes off from top to bottom, took his photo album and autograph book, put it on his chest, and he took his athletic tape and wrapped it around him and tied his arms and stuff together. And I'm sitting there watching this. The other boys were sort of laughing. I'm feeling sorry for this poor kid. And then after Brooks was done tying him up with all this stuff, he opens up the dressing room door and kicks him out into the hallway. Poor Mikey Pooh, I can hear him basically crying and in tears. And it's like, what am I going to do? If I'm going to, go out there and save the kid, these other guys would have, ripped me a new behind. But that's one of those Killer Brooks stories that has never been told.
And Mikey Pooh proudly told that story for years and years to come. He, in retrospect, perhaps enjoyed every minute of it.
Yep. And that wraps it up for another, it's an interesting, tales that have never, ever been released or told, by me and Terry that we experienced. And in closing, as we usually do, a ring announcement, for a particular gentleman. But let me see if I can come up with one today, because we didn't do one on. How about doing one on Big Jess Ortega?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Big Jess. As Jess Ortega, as Bull Ortega, or as Ortega-san?
Or as handsome Jess Ortega
Handsome Jess Ortega.
when he wore a mask.
That's right, because his visage was just too much for the public to be able to take.
Yeah. Give us his ring announcement.
Ladies
as you
and
do.
gentlemen, from Mexico City, weighing 350 pounds, Big Jess Ortega. Big Jess.
I'm trying to think of who knows. I didn't think of a person before.
I'm really proud to say that I'm a part of IBW.
I take pride in IBW that we are a family-run company.
It's a fight. It's a sport. At IBW, tradition has always mattered.
You're going to see world-class professional big-time wrestling at its best.
This ain't no sports entertainment. This is professional wrestling.
International Big Time Wrestling's The Fix. Each and every week, your fix of IBW action. You want entertainment? Look no further than Rocks TV. International Big Time Wrestling!
Wrestling fans, if you like what you've seen, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also don't forget to ring that bell.